Now, custom drawing. This is slightly more complex. So what we do is we provide an interface. It's an iCustomList element interface. And when you implement this interface, this draw element method gets called every time that list has to be drawn. So it gives you, as a parameter, the canvas. So you can take this canvas, and to this canvas, you can do any drawing that you want. You can draw using bitmaps. You can draw using all the graphic primitives that we have. You can draw text or anything that you like to do. So in our example, we're drawing the album art, and depending on the current music playback status, the pause or the play icon. Okay, now that we've defined the item format, handled custom drawing, we can go on to actually creating the items of the list. So to this format, I'm actually setting for each item the images, the text strings that I need. And I've created a custom list item. Now I'll be creating multiple custom list items and adding those to the list. Another feature that we have with this custom list item is that we have this progress GUI. So we can set the value of the progress to somewhere from 0 to 100. And that would show the corresponding GUI. So we can use this for, in our case, the music playback. So now that we have the format, we go about creating the actual item. So in the constructor, we have the height of the item, which is, in our case, 100. And we're assigning to it which format we're going to use. So for each item, we have to assign to it which format we want to use. In our case, it's the same format, but it could easily be that you have different formats for different items. There's the example of the instant messenger that is implemented in the Wave phones, where we are using bubbles to kind of show threaded messaging. So there's my message and your message going back and forth. So we use different item formats for that kind of UI. Okay, and then we are assigning to the item the actual values I want to use. I created the custom list element class instance and passing that to the first element, the custom, and I'm assigning the different strings to compose my item. Okay, now I have the items. This is how to handle the touch events of this custom list. It's not that much different from the conventional list, so this should be just we should be able to breeze through this. So when the user selects on touches on this area, we get the onItemStateChanged method invoked, and the item ID is passed along, so I know which one has been pressed. Now, in the case where the event status is set to true for that element, I get the different version of onItemStateChanged callback. This one has the element ID also in the parameter, so I know that in this case, the ID format custom, this is the element that was pressed. So in this case, I'm not showing the code here, but I can start music playback and show the progress, update the progress. This progress is not an animation, so you have to set the value yourself. You would have to run, say, a timer to be able to keep the progress up to date. Okay, so we've looked at how we've created the item and handling the items in the event interaction in the custom list. And this is finally for what we have to do to make it into a slidable list. So slidable list is basically the same as a custom list, but the only difference is that the items are not added at the same time. So if we have a long list, as we do here, the system lets us know when you have to load which items into memory. Let's call that memory a cache. So when the items are scrolled and they are no longer needed, then they are unloaded from cache. And when new items have to be loaded, because I'm scrolling in that direction, then the system asks me to populate the list with those items. So this is the way that we recommend you use most lists, because I assume that most lists will be kind of dynamic in its size. So there are things that we have to do to handle the slidable list. There's the slidable list properties, and some interaction for actually how to handle this cache loading and unloading. So looking at the first item, the properties. One thing that you have to remember is that we have to let the system know exactly how many items are in the list and what's the total height of the list. So if, say, my list had 100 or 200 items, I would have to let it know that I have 200 items and what is the total height. If the height of each item was, say, 100 pixels, then it would be 200 times 100. So this information is necessary because the system uses that to draw the scroll bar. So there's the thumb area of the scroll bar, which kind of shows you, if you see a short thumb, you know that you have a long list. If you have a tall thumb area, then you know that the list is short. So in order to calculate that list, the scroll bar, we have to let the system know what the count and the total height is. So when this value changes because you've added new items or deleted items, then you have to update the system as well. So this is how it looks in code. It's the same. We create the slidable list. We are constructing it. We can set different properties like this is similar to custom list. We can have a check style UI on the right side, on-off toggles, or radio UI for selecting single selecting, multiple selecting. We have those type of lists. And we are adding the slidable list event listener. So this lets us know when we have to load new items to the cache and when items are being unloaded. And finally, we have the item count and the total height setting API. Okay, now how to handle this interaction. So when the list is scrolled down in this example, then the system requests that we load to the top the item from the item index number of items. So this could be one, or this could be multiples. The system could ask you to load multiple items depending on the speed of the scroll. So if you're scrolling very fast, then the system would ask you to load multiple items, whereas if you're scrolling very slow, it might just ask you for one or two. That kind of depends on the size of the item and the scrolling speed. So it asks us to load to the cache starting from item index, num items of items. So in my example, I'm going through a simple loop, number of items count, that's my count, and I'm loading to the top. Load item to top, the items of the list, and the item ID. So the index is set automatically. So item ID is something that I can set. I can use this if I want instead of using indexes. Index is something that is maintained by the system, and it changes as new items are added and deleted. So sometimes it's more convenient to use an item ID, which is a value that I've assigned to it. You have to note that if you assign the same item ID to multiple items, then you wouldn't be able to recognize them. So you have to make sure that each item ID is unique. So when I've called the load item to top, this item gets populated. And so this is the way the slidable list works. And when an item is no longer needed, it will be unloaded from the cache. Now at this point, it's not that important that I'm made aware that this item is unloaded. See, when I load an item to a list, I no longer have to worry about the memory resources for the bitmap or the string. That's all taken care of by the item when it's being loaded, when it's being unloaded. So there is no memory leak that you have to worry about. However, you might have created something else. You might have, in this onload to top requested, you could have created new resources. So you could have created a music clip you wanted to play back, in which case you would have to know when to unload the music clips. So that's why we do provide the onload item requested and callback. So by implementing this method, you can handle any additional resources that you want to take care of.